Exactly.
Well,
Matt, we've talked a lot about on this show. Obviously, the Colts are looking at potentially, probably getting a quarterback at some point in the NFL draft. Don't know where they're going to go, but I'm interested more because the quarterback stuff can get exhausting. What are some other positions of need? Are there specific players at the combine or in meetings since the combine that have really stuck out to the Colts? What is kind of their mindset going into this draft in terms of getting some positions of need and what can make them, maybe not a Super Bowl contender right now, but getting back in that AFC South conversation and then building for the future?
No, great question. I think this team has some glaring areas on their roster that need to be addressed in the offseason, whether that's the draft or continued free agency or undrafted free agents. But you look at a couple spots, cornerback in the secondary. Stephon Gilmore no longer here. They traded him right at the start of free agency to the Dallas Cowboys. They got an extra 5th-round pick, so maybe they use that to maybe package up to get a corner in the draft, maybe in the 2nd round, 3rd round, who knows. But also gone is Dallas Flowers. And although he was primarily a role player last year, he was still a veteran guy that provided some leadership and stability in the back end at corner. He's now back with the Raiders where he came from before this past season. So when you factor those two guys in, actually, that's 1,400 defensive snaps at the cornerback position gone on your roster. And then you also look at, Kenny Moore last year. He had a down season by his own standards. He was really frustrated personally with how his season went last year playing nickel. That position just for whatever reason wasn't accentuated as much in year one under Gus Bradley as it was the previous couple of seasons with Matt Eberflus as the defensive coordinator for the Colts. So I know Kenny was pretty down on himself last year. I mean, he ended the season on IR. He got banged up with a pretty nasty ankle injury. So that was kind of a blemish for him on how his year went last year, but kind of down on himself with no picks, no takeaways, no major plays from his angle. So I think he and Gus kind of met at the end of the year this year and talked about how he can be more of an impactful player, more of a playmaking slot corner, because he's still one of the best players at his position in the NFL. They just need more production out of him and maybe find better ways to scheme him up to be involved in the defense. So definitely cornerback. And then, too, if you look at the offensive line right now, it's going to get addressed. It has to get addressed, quite frankly. But if you look at it right now, I mean, if you were to play a game today, Bernhard Raimann's going to be your left tackle. But if something happens to him, I don't know where the Colts turn to in that regard as of right now. And thankfully, they don't play any games, here on April 20, whatever. Right. But they need some more depth at the tackle position. Maybe bring in a guy that has some versatility, swing guy, play left side, play right side, or be able to play guard and tackle. That has to be addressed in this draft. I think it will be. But those are the two areas for me that are sort of like the gaping needs that need to be addressed either in the draft or free agency. And then some of the more subtle ones, I think, is wide receiver and maybe running back. And it sounds crazy to say running back, but, you look at Jonathan Taylor and, he missed 6 games last year and he had the ankle injury. I don't know if you can continuously afford to give him, 300 carries a year just because of how special he is, and you want him available 18 games or 17 games a season. And then wide receiver too. I just think you need more pop. I think you need more top-end talent at the pass-catching position to go along with Michael Pittman Jr. and Alec Pierce. And I think that also might make some sense if you bring in a young rookie quarterback like we all think the Colts are likely to do in this draft. Pair him up with a young, exciting, dynamic wide receiver that guy can build with and grow with and really build up some synergy and rapport with as they grow together in the NFL. So, the passing game last year for the Colts, it was just really, really disappointing the way it ended. They haven't been over 250 passing yards regularly in a long, long time, and their yards per catch numbers across the board weren't very high. Michael Pittman Jr., his yards per catch for the season was under 10. It's been a long time since the Colts had a leading wide receiver be under 10 yards per catch for the season. So they need more pop. They need more dynamic, explosive plays. It sounds cliche, but it's so true. I mean, the team in the NFL that wins the turnover battle and has more chunk plays likely is going to be the team that wins in the National Football League. And the Colts really, really struggled in those two areas last year. So those are, I would say, running back and wide receiver, kind of two under the radar places the Colts could address their roster in this draft next weekend.
And one of the things, too, that kind of interests me, Matt, is with Shane Steichen and the success he had in Philadelphia, and you're bringing in probably a young quarterback, and hopefully they bring, I think they definitely need a wide receiver or two in this draft or free agency, however they're going to add it. But do you think that, because I agree with you, we talked about this all last season, as cool as it is to say that Jonathan Taylor rushes for 2,000 yards, you probably want that number to be maybe around 1,400 because you don't want to, the lifespan of a running back in today's NFL is not very long. So you want to keep that guy as healthy as possible. Is there going to be some learning by fire in which Shane Steichen's not going to force the ball to Jonathan Taylor just to win some football games? Instead, he wants to develop these young players, develop a young quarterback, the offensive line, some wide receivers. And even though if it doesn't look great on the field, there's a long-term plan to keep Jonathan Taylor healthy. And then for some of these younger guys to learn the offense, learn the system. So maybe they're not in the playoff conversation in 2023, but they're set up for success down the road.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that goes back to Shane Steichen's overall philosophy. When he met the team and he met the media his first day on the job when he was announced as head coach, his philosophy was, I'm going to throw it. The Colts are going to offensively, we're going to throw it to score, and we're going to run it to win. And I think that's sort of the perfect motto, because you want Jonathan Taylor to be heavily involved in your offense, but you don't want to rely on him to win football games, maybe like the Colts kind of fell in the trap of in years past because of instability at quarterback, offensive line struggles, inconsistencies with the wide receivers. So obviously, you dance with the guy that got you there. That was Jonathan Taylor, and maybe teams were able to kind of focus on that. I mean, I think you bring up a great point. 2 years ago, when the Colts were on the fringe of making the playoffs before they fell off those last two games in 2021. I mean, Jonathan Taylor that year was over 1,800 yards rushing, set a franchise record for rushing yards in a season and rushing touchdowns, and the Colts missed the playoffs, right? I mean, he led the NFL by a wide margin, and they still didn't make the postseason. So you have to be able to throw the football, and I think that's a perfect analogy or philosophy that Shane Steichen is using. We're going to score points by throwing the ball, putting the ball in the air, and letting our playmakers make plays. But the way you win in this league, the way you close out games, the way you salt a game away in the final 4 minutes is you pound them, you run the ball. And you go back to Philly, they had great playmakers with Jalen Hurts and Smith and Brown and a good offensive line and Sanders running the football. So they were I think they epitomized that approach. They scored a lot of points, got a lot of guys involved in the passing game, but they were also the number one rushing team in the NFL last year. So they had a surefire formula of scoring, getting you down, and then putting you away in the running game. They had over 5,000 yards rushing combined in the last 2 years. So that has to be music to Jonathan Taylor's ears in terms of still being involved in the offense and being a focal point of it, but not having to rely on him to score points, if that makes sense. I think there's a difference between Jonathan Taylor going for 25 carries and $180 and Jonathan Taylor going for 18 carries and $110 and maybe having better success overall within your offense, scoring more points and winning more games if you're able to have a more balanced attack within the passing game, which the Colts, quite frankly, just haven't had at all closely to that in the last 2 years.